The shrill ring of the phone pierced the heavy silence of the residence lounge like a scalpel cutting through flesh. It was 5:30 a.m., and the Georgia night, outside the hospital windows, was still thick and impenetrable, a blanket of ink-black darkness that made the fluorescent lights inside feel harsh and unforgiving. Zenziel Vance bolted upright on the sagging, worn-out sofa where she had collapsed just 3 hours earlier. Her mind was foggy, disoriented, as she tried to piece together where she was and why. Her head throbbed with the vice-like grip of exhaustion. She had been on call for nearly 24 hours straight, handling everything from routine appendectomies to a late-night trauma case. Sleep had come in fragmented bursts, never deep enough to truly refresh her. Now, as the phone continued its insistent demand, Zenziel fumbled for it on the side table, her heart already picking up pace. In the world of surgery, a call at this hour was never good news. It was always a harbinger of chaos, of life hanging by a thread. In the hallway outside the lounge, the hospital was already stirring with the frantic energy of an emergency. The rattle of gurneys echoed against the tiled floors, accompanied by the rapid thud of footsteps and muffled shouts. Someone was yelling, "Fast! We need her now!" The voice carried that unmistakable high-pitched urgency reserved for true life-or-death situations, the kind that made even seasoned doctors feel a chill down their spine. Zenziel threw off the thin blanket, grabbed her white coat from the chair, and shrugged it on as she sprinted toward the emergency room. Her sneakers squeaked against the floor, and she didn't bother fixing her disheveled hair or wiping the sleep from her eyes. There was no time for that. As she burst into the ER, the chaos hit her like a wave, nurses rushing with IV bags, monitors beeping erratically, and the metallic tang of blood in the air. Standing by the nurses' station was Dr. Langston Brooks, the chief of surgery. His face was grave, etched with the expression of a man who had seen too many disasters, but still felt the weight of each one. He spotted her immediately and waved her over, his voice clipped and urgent. "Zenziel, we've got a bad one. 5-year-old boy, ruptured spleen from a motor vehicle accident on I-85 about an hour ago. Massive internal bleeding. The trauma teams stretched thin tonight. 2 other majors came in simultaneously. Can you handle this?" The words hit Zenziel like rapid-fire bullets. A child? So young, so fragile. But even as the details sank in, a flicker of her personal life flashed through her mind unbidden. Today was her wedding day. The ballroom at the Grand Regency Hotel in Buckhead was booked. Decorations set, guests arriving soon. Her mother, Mansa, had spent weeks fussing over every detail, begging Zenziel to be the flawless bride. And then there was Soraya Duclair, her future mother-in-law, whose perpetual air of disapproval had made the wedding preparations a minefield of tension. Zenziel pushed those thoughts aside. There was no room for hesitation in moments like this. Lives didn't wait for convenient timing. "I can do it," she said firmly, meeting Dr. Brooks' eyes. He hesitated for a split second, glancing at the calendar on the wall, as if confirming what he already knew. "Isn't your ceremony today? The whole hospital's been buzzing about it." "I'll make it," Zenziel snapped, already turning toward the scrub sinks. There was steel in her voice, a determination born from years of proving herself in a field dominated by doubt and exhaustion. As she hurried down the hallway to the surgical suite, she passed a man pacing frantically outside the doors. He was large, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored, expensive suit that looked out of place in the sterile hospital environment. His face was ashen, eyes red-rimmed from worry or lack of sleep, or both. He glanced at her desperately, as if pleading for reassurance, but there was no time to stop. On the gurney being wheeled into the OR lay the boy. He was so pale from blood loss that his skin seemed translucent, like marble carved by a sculptor. His small chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Nurses shoved the charts into Zenziel's hands as they moved, and she scanned them quickly while gloving up, vital signs crashing, blood pressure dropping fast. Estimated blood loss, severe. 10 more minutes of delay, and there would be nothing left to save. Her heart tightened in her chest, a mix of professional focus and raw human empathy. This was a child, someone's son, with a whole life ahead of him. The operating room was a hive of controlled urgency. The anesthesiologist called out confirmations. The scrub nurses laid out instruments with precise efficiency, and the monitors beeped in a steady rhythm that Zenziel clung to like a lifeline. She took her position at the table, the bright overhead lights casting no shadows on the surgical field. The surgery began. 4 hours. That's how long it lasted. 4 grueling, intense hours where the world outside the OR ceased to exist. Nothing mattered except the tiny, delicate vessels in the child's abdomen, torn and bleeding from the impact of the crash. Zenzil's world narrowed to the incision, the suction, the meticulous stitching. She repaired the ruptured spleen with millimeter by millimeter precision, the kind she had honed through countless hours in residency, through sleepless nights studying anatomy texts and practicing on cadavers. Her back ached intensely, a deep burn that made her want to double over. But she stood straight, unwavering. Sweat slicked her neck and forehead, soaking into her cap. By the 3rd hour, her fingers began to tremble from the sheer physical strain. The fine motor control required pushing her to her limits. But she didn't falter. She couldn't, not with this small life depending on her. Thoughts tried to intrude, the wedding dress waiting in her locker, the guests assembling, Kellen probably pacing in his tuxedo, but she shoved them away. Focus, breathe, stitch, clamp, the gyo. Monotonous beep of the monitors became her anchor, a reminder that the boy was still fighting. Finally, after what felt like an eternity compressed into those 4 hours, the anesthesiologist's voice broke through. Vitals are stabilizing. Pressure's holding. Zenziel exhaled, a deep, shuddering breath that felt like her first in hours. Relief flooded her, warm and profound. "Good work, Vance," Dr. Brooks said as she emerged into the hallway, pulling off her mask and gloves. He clapped her on the shoulder, a rare gesture of praise from the stoic chief. "You pulled that boy back from the brink. Incredible." "Thanks," she murmured, her voice hoarse. Adrenaline was crashing now, leaving her drained. "Now get out of here," he added. "Go to your wedding." "You've earned it." Nurse Kesha caught up with her in the lounge, handing over her phone with a sympathetic look. The screen was lit with a chaos of missed calls, dozens from unknown numbers, likely the groom's relatives who had already gathered at the venue. "At least 20 people called, honey," Kesha said softly. "I know today is your big day. Go." Zenziel nodded gratefully. "Thanks." She didn't bother calling back. Explanations over the phone would be pointless, and time was slipping away faster than she could grasp. In the empty lounge, she changed into her wedding dress right there, her stiff, exhausted fingers fumbling with the buttons and tiny hooks on the back. She had chosen a simple gown deliberately, no massive crinoline skirts or heavy embroidery, so she could manage it alone if needed. Now she was profoundly grateful for that foresight. There was no time for makeup, no mirror to check her reflection properly. She wiped her face with wet wipes, erasing the remnants of sweat and fatigue as best she could, then pulled her hair into a tight, sleek ponytail. Glancing at the clock, her stomach twisted. She was hours late already. Grabbing her keys, she ran to the parking lot and jumped into her old reliable car. It cranked on the first try, a small Mercy. Driving across Atlanta from the hospital district toward upscale Buckhead, Zenziel wove through the thickening Saturday traffic. The city was waking up, sunlight breaking through the morning haze. She mentally rehearsed what she would say to Soraya Duclair, Kellen's mother, whose disapproval had been a constant undercurrent throughout their engagement. Soraya had always viewed Zenziel as an inconvenience, a career-obsessed woman who didn't fit the mold of a proper Duclair wife. Comments about her long shifts, her dedication to medicine, had been laced with subtle or not-so-subtle criticism. But Kellen would understand. He had to. "He told me he's proud of my work," Zenziel whispered to herself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "He'll take my side. We've talked about this 1,000 times. Emergencies happen. Medicine doesn't stop for personal milestones." She believed it with every fiber of her being. 3 years together, his proposal under the city lights, his promises to stand by her. It had to count for something. As she approached the Grand Regency Hotel, she spotted the crowd at the entrance. Her heart lifted momentarily. "They're waiting for me," she thought. A welcoming committee, perhaps. But as she parked and stepped out in her wedding dress, the scene sharpened into something else entirely. Soraya Duclair stood at the front, arms crossed tightly, flanked by relatives. Kellen's older brother Sterling, great-aunt Odette, and a wall of about 20 family members. Their faces were not joyful. They were furious. This wasn't a greeting. It was a blockade. Zenziel stepped out of her car into the bright midday sun. The simple white fabric of her wedding dress catching the light as she straightened her posture. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered in her chest. The crowd gathered at the entrance of the Grand Regency Hotel looked like a reception. Line, elegant suits, colorful dresses, flowers in hands. Perhaps they had simply come out to welcome her, to cheer her arrival after the long delay. But the moment she drew closer, the illusion shattered. Soraya Duclair stood at the very front, arms folded so tightly across her chest that her knuckles were white. Her lips were pressed into a thin, furious line, and her eyes, usually cold and calculating, now blazed with open rage. Behind her, like soldiers in formation, stood at least 20 members of the Duclair family. Kellen's older brother, Sterling, great-aunt Odette, cousins, uncles, aunts, all of them wearing expressions, ranging from righteous indignation to outright contempt. There was no joy here, no understanding, only judgment. Zenziel slowed her steps, her exhausted body suddenly feeling heavier. The 4-hour surgery, the adrenaline crash, the lack of food or proper rest, all of it pressed down on her as she faced this human wall. "We spent $50,000 on this venue," Soraya began, her voice low but vibrating with barely contained fury. 50,000. And where have you been? Gallivanting around while the rest of us sit inside looking like fools? The words struck like slaps. Zenziel opened her mouth to explain, but Soraya wasn't finished. "It was an emergency surgery," Zenziel said, keeping her voice as steady as possible despite the tremor building in her chest. "A 5-year-old boy came in at 5 this morning with a ruptured spleen from a car accident. He would have died if— I don't give a damn about your surgeries." Soraya cut her off sharply, stepping forward. Heads turned from the hotel entrance as guests inside began to notice the commotion. "It's always an excuse with you. A shift, an operation, some dissertation nobody asked for. You chose the wrong day to play hero." Sterling, Kellen's older brother, moved beside his mother, towering over Zenziel with the arrogance of a man who had never been told no. "A doctor should understand that a wedding day is sacred," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Leaving my brother standing at the altar in front of 200 guests. It's a disgrace to the Duclair name. How is he supposed to look people in the eye after this?" Great-aunt Odette, frail but venomous, added her voice to the chorus. "I said it from the beginning. This career-obsessed woman isn't fit to be a wife. She's not the one, Kellen. Never was." The words landed like stones, each one heavier than the last. Zenziel felt heat rush to her face as dozens of eyes fixed on her, judging, sentencing. Over the past 3 years, she had endured countless subtle digs, the side-eye glances when she arrived late to family dinners. "Because of a late surgery," the comments about how a decent woman doesn't work 80-hour weeks, the constant comparisons to Jasmine, Kellen's childhood friend who could whip up a 5-course meal, keep a spotless home, and never speak out of turn. Zenziel had swallowed it all, believing that her excellence as a surgeon would eventually earn their respect. That love, Kellen's love, would be enough to bridge the gap. She had been wrong. "Where is Kellen?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost foreign to her own ears. "I want to see him. Let him tell me this himself." Soraya let out a sharp, bitter laugh that cut deeper than any insult. "My son has already exchanged rings with Jasmine," she said, savoring each word. A woman who actually understands the meaning of family and respect. A woman who wouldn't abandon her husband for total strangers in a hospital. The world tilted. From inside the ballroom, muffled music drifted out, joyful, upbeat, celebratory. Laughter, the clink of glasses, the MC's voice announcing toasts. A wedding was happening, her wedding. But the groom was standing beside another woman. Zenziel stood frozen, the edges of her vision blurring as if she were looking through fogged glass. Her mind refused to process it. "The papers are being signed as we speak," Sterling added coldly, shoving his hands into his pockets. "They'll be legally married by next month. Now get out of here before we call security. Don't cause a scene." 3 years. 3 years of shared apartments, late-night talks, promises whispered in the dark. She remembered Kellen on one knee at that restaurant overlooking the Atlanta skyline, his voice trembling as he said he would protect her, that he wouldn't let his mother interfere, that he was proud of her career. She had believed him. Every word. And now, after 4 hours, saving a child's life, he had put a ring on someone else's finger. Had Jasmine always been the backup plan? Had they pressured him? Or had he simply been too weak to stand against his family as he always had been. The questions battered her, but no tears came. If she spoke now, her voice would break. And she refused to give them that satisfaction. Suddenly, the deep roar of a powerful engine sliced through the tension. Heads turned. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided into the hotel. Driveway, an entrance that demanded attention even in wealthy Buckhead. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. A tall, middle-aged man emerged, dressed in a dark charcoal suit that spoke of quiet power rather than flashy wealth. His face was drawn with exhaustion and relief. Zenziel recognized him immediately. The man who had been pacing outside the OR that morning, the boy's father. He walked straight toward her, ignoring the Duclairs entirely, and stopped a respectful distance away. Then, to everyone's shock, he bowed his head deeply, a gesture of profound gratitude. Caspian Sterling, he introduced himself quietly, his voice carrying the rasp of someone who hadn't slept in days. You saved my son's life today. I came to thank you. The Duclair family froze. Whispers rippled through the group like wind through dry leaves. In Atlanta's elite circles, everyone knew the name Sterling. Caspian Sterling's company had built half the new luxury high-rises downtown. His face appeared regularly in business journals and society pages. Power recognized power, and suddenly the balance shifted. Zenziel saw the transformation on Soraya's face instantly. The rage drained away, replaced by wide-eyed fear. Her mouth opened, then closed. The lips that had been hurling venom now trembled. Zenziel, honey. Soraya's voice emerged sickly sweet, nauseatingly placating. Our dear daughter-in-law. Wait just a moment. Caspian swept a cold, measured gaze across the crowd, lingering on each face as if committing them to memory. I wanted to thank the doctor in front of her family, he said, his tone calm but edged with steel. I expected to find a celebration. Instead, I find a group of people surrounding and insulting a woman who, just 4 hours ago, pulled my child back from death's door. Soraya tried to speak. We were just... I heard everything, Caspian interrupted. Every single word. He turned back to Zenziel, his expression softening. You don't have to stay here. If you wish, I can take you wherever you need to go. Zenziel looked past him toward the ballroom doors, where music still played and laughter still rang out. Then she looked at the wall of people who had just told her to leave, and at Soraya, whose fake smile now looked desperate and grotesque. The hypocrisy burned worse than the insults. It revealed the true currency of their respect: power, status, money. Not character, not sacrifice. Zenziel, baby, come back. Soraya called as Zenziel turned silently and walked toward the waiting Rolls-Royce. She didn't answer, didn't look back. Head high, shoulders squared, she walked away from the life she had planned. The dress still pristine on her body, but now, feeling like a costume from a play that had ended, mid-performance. The Rolls-Royce was cool and quiet inside, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Caspian sat across from her, giving her space, saying nothing as the car pulled away from the hotel. Atlanta's skyline receded in the side window. After several long minutes, he spoke softly. I'm sorry you had to face that on what should have been a joyful day. Zenziel stared out the window, watching familiar streets pass. I saved a life this morning, she said, almost to herself. And lost everything else. Not everything, Caspian replied quietly. You kept your integrity. That's worth more than any wedding. They ended up at a small, quiet coffee shop in a leafy neighborhood far from Buckhead's glamour. It was nearly empty, with sunlight filtering through old oak trees outside. Caspian ordered 2 coffees without asking what she wanted. Black, strong, no sugar, and waited for the server to leave before placing a thick envelope on the table. $80,000, he said simply. It's far less than the value of my son's life, but please accept it as my gratitude. Zenziel shook her head, not even touching the envelope. I can't take that. I'm a surgeon. It's my job, my calling, to save lives. If I start accepting money beyond my salary for individual patients, my conscience becomes a commodity. And without a clear conscience, what kind of doctor am I? Caspian studied her for a long moment, then tucked the envelope away without offense. Respect deepened in his eyes. I wanted to thank you properly at your wedding, he said, stirring his coffee slowly. I learned at the hospital that today was your day. I thought I'd say a few words so everyone would know exactly what kind of woman you are. He waved a hand toward the memory of the Duclairs. They thought you were just some ordinary resident they could push around. Replace when convenient. Zenzil gave a bitter smile. They weren't entirely wrong about the ordinary part. I don't come from money or connections. I thought love would be enough. Caspian remained silent, offering no empty reassurances. That silence felt like kindness, giving her space to breathe, to feel, without trying to fix it. Is there anything else I can do? He asked eventually. Take me to my mother's house in Cascade, Zenzil said. Before the Duclairs decide to show up there and cause a scene. They're capable of it. He nodded immediately and spoke quietly to the driver. As the car glided through the city, Zenzil finally dialed her mother's number. Mansa answered on the first ring, worry thick in her voice. Baby, where are you? Why haven't you been picking up? I didn't know what to think. Did you make it to the Regency? Mama, Zenzil said, swallowing hard. There was an emergency surgery early this morning. A little boy. I couldn't walk away. She paused. The groom's family. They have some issues with that. I'm coming home. I'll tell you everything when I get there. Mansa was quiet for a beat, then let out a heavy sigh. The sigh of a mother who already understood, more than her daughter. Wanted to say over the phone, all right, baby. I'll be here. And don't you let anyone trample on you. Not a single soul. A person goes where they're valued, not where they're tolerated. The car pulled up to the familiar modest bungalow in Cascade. The gate creaked the same way it always had. The crepe myrtle in the front yard was blooming pink. Home. Mansa met her at the door in an old robe, dish towel in hand, eyes widening at the sight of her. Daughter in a wedding dress that would never walk down an aisle. She asked no questions, just opened her arms. Zenzil stepped inside, into warmth, safety, and the faint smell of peach cobbler. Cooling on the counter, the cobbler Mansa had baked that morning for a celebration that would never happen. Some doors, Zenzil realized as her mother closed the door behind her, close for a reason, and you don't beg to be let back in. The days after the cancelled wedding blurred into a quiet, deliberate rhythm inside the modest bungalow in Cascade. Zenzil took a full week of medical leave, the first extended break she had, allowed herself in years, and spent it almost entirely at home with her mother. The outside world felt distant, muffled, as if wrapped in cotton. Neighbors whispered over fences about the drama that had unfolded at the Grand Regency. But inside Mansa's house, there was only the familiar creak of floorboards, the smell of strong coffee in the mornings, and the steady presence of a mother who asked no questions until her daughter was ready to speak. Zenzil slept long, dreamless hours at first, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion it had carried for months. When she woke, Mansa was always nearby, reading in her armchair, folding laundry, or humming old gospel tunes while peeling peaches in the kitchen. They made simple breakfasts together, fluffy biscuits, scrambled eggs, slices of ripe tomato from the backyard vine. Mansa reminded her gently to take her own blood pressure. Medication, a running family joke, since Zenzil was the doctor but terrible at following her own advice. One afternoon, as sunlight slanted through the sheer curtains, Zenzil finally told her mother everything. She sat at the kitchen table in an oversized t-shirt and sweatpants, the wedding dress long since folded away in a box at the back of the closet. She spoke in a calm, measured voice about the 5 a.m. call, the 4-hour surgery, the wall of Duclairs at the hotel, Soraya's venom, Kellen's unthinkable betrayal, and the moment Caspian Sterling stepped out of the Rolls-Royce like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she'd made. Mansa listened without interrupting, her weathered hands folded on the faded tablecloth, eyes never leaving her daughter's face. When Zenzil finished, the silence stretched for a long moment. Outside, a lawnmower droned in the distance. A good person reveals themselves in crisis, Mansa said finally, her voice steady as bedrock, and a weak one hides. Your Kellen hid behind his mama's skirt. She reached across the table and covered Zenzil's hand with her own. Not everything that glitters is gold, baby. I told you to look closer at that boy, but you were in love and didn't want to hear it. Can't blame you for that. Zenzil managed a small, sad smile. I thought if I just worked hard enough, proved myself enough, they'd come around. They never intended to, Mansa replied bluntly. Some folks only respect what scares them or what they can control. You were neither. Before Zenzil could respond, the sound of car doors slamming erupted outside, followed by a chorus of raised voices. Mansa stood immediately, smoothing her robe like armor. Stay here, she ordered. I'll handle this. Through the sheer curtains, Zenzil watched her mother step onto the porch, arms crossed, spine straight as a ruler. At the gate stood Soraya Duclair, wearing a forced, pained smile, flanked by Sterling and two aunts. Behind them sat Sterling's gleaming black SUV. Soraya was already speaking in a syrupy tone. "We just want to apologize. It was all a terrible misunderstanding. Zenzil has always been like a daughter to me." Mansa's voice cut through like a blade. "This morning you told my daughter to get out of that parking lot. Now suddenly she's your daughter? Your memory seems real selective." "This is a family matter," Sterling tried, puffing up. "Zenzil is our sister-in-law. We have a right—" "If there was no wedding," Mansa snapped, "there is no sister-in-law. And if your brother already swapped rings with another woman in front of 200 guests, what exactly is left to talk about? Did you value her when you were chasing her away? Or did you only start valuing her when you found out whose child she saved?" Soraya opened her mouth, then closed it, face paling. Caspian Sterling's driver still parked discreetly at the curb from dropping Zenzil off. Earlier, stepped out of the Rolls-Royce and approached politely but firmly. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the property." The sight of a man of Caspian stature guarding a modest Cascade bungalow was apparently the final blow. Soraya's fake smile crumbled. They retreated to the SUV in silence and drove away. Mansa came back inside, locked the door with deliberate clicks, and returned to her chair. "That's that," she said simply. "Those people aren't your family and never were. Live your life, baby." Zenzil crossed the room and hugged her mother tightly, burying her face in the familiar shoulder that smelled of laundry detergent and home. "I'm sorry." "Mama, you worked so hard preparing all that food for the reception." "What are you apologizing for?" Mansa stroked her hair. "You saved a child's life. You didn't run off to some party. You live with a clean conscience. That's all that matters. And we'll eat that peach cobbler ourselves." They did, slice by warm slice, with vanilla ice cream melting on top, sitting on the back porch watching fireflies blink in the dusk. Zenzil's phone buzzed constantly in those first days. Unknown numbers, Soraya, Sterling, distant Duclair relatives she barely knew. She blocked them one by one until finally Kellen's name appeared. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment before she answered. "Zenzil." His voice was raspy, rushed, stripped of its usual confidence. "Please listen. My mother had a breakdown. The ceremony with Jasmine was just to calm her down. It didn't mean anything. We can fix the paperwork. I don't want to lose you." Zenzil sat on the edge of her childhood bed, staring at the faded floral wallpaper. Her voice, when it came, was surprisingly calm. "If it didn't mean anything, why did you put a ring on another woman's finger in front of 100 guests?" "They forced me," he said quickly. "Mother said she couldn't handle the shame." She clutched her heart. "Where were you, Kellen? While I was in the OR for 4 hours fighting for that boy's life?" Silence stretched on the line. "I was nervous," he admitted finally. "I didn't know what to do. Mother was screaming. Jasmine showed up. You should have been at the hospital," Zenzil said quietly. "Waiting outside the operating room. Just being there would have been enough. But you chose to stay home and marry someone else. I don't blame your mother," she continued before he could interrupt. "I blame you. You're a grown man. The chance ended when you took the easy way out. Give me a second chance. I'll change. I promise. There are moments, Kellen, that once missed can never be brought back. That morning was ours. It's gone. Is there someone else?" he asked, desperation creeping in. "That's none of your business. Anymore." She ended the call and blocked his number too. For the first time, the ache in her chest eased slightly. Not gone, but bearable. A hollow space remained where pain had been, but it felt cleaner, like a wound finally starting to heal. One evening near the end of her leave, as the sun set in streaks of orange and purple, a simple SUV pulled up outside, no Rolls-Royce this time. Caspian Sterling stepped out alone, sleeves rolled up on a plain button-down shirt, carrying 2 heavy grocery bags. Mansa opened the door herself and gave him the evaluating stare of a woman who had seen every kind of man there was. "I wanted to properly introduce myself," Caspian said, setting the bags on the kitchen table, "and see if you needed help around the house. I noticed the back fence is leaning. I can send men to fix it tomorrow." Mansa didn't smile yet. "And what exactly are your intentions, Mr. Sterling? Don't try to sweet-talk me. I'm a simple woman. I like things honest." Caspian met her gaze without flinching. "I'm not trying to buy my way in, ma'am. I just think that after a hard moment, a person could use some practical support. No pressure, no conditions. Your daughter saved my son's life, and I watched her be chased away from her own wedding day. That's wrong. I'd like to help where I can. Mansa studied his hands, large, callous despite his wealth. The hands of a man who had worked hard to build what he had. Finally, she nodded once. You're not a show-off, she said. You seem like a man who loves his child. Fine, we'll see what kind of man you are. Later, when Mansa stepped into the kitchen to put away groceries, Caspian spoke quietly to Zenziel on the porch. I'm willing to wait as a friend for as long as you need. If you ever don't want to see me again, say the word, and I won't come back. Zenziel looked at him, at the quiet strength in his eyes, the absence of demands or expectations, and felt something loosen inside her. Don't disappear, she said after a pause. I just need time. A lot of time. He nodded. Time you've got. At the door, Mansa pulled her daughter aside. Don't rush, she warned. Don't lose your head. Money doesn't make the man. Look closely this time, or you'll get burned again. A week later, Zenziel returned to work. She pulled on her white coat in the locker room, the familiar weight of it settling on her shoulders like an old friend. Walking the hospital hallways again felt like coming home in a way the Duclair world never had. Colleagues greeted her with quiet respect, some with careful hugs, no one prying too deeply. But on her very first day back, Dr. Brooks called her into his office, expression grim. A formal complaint has been filed against you, he said, not meeting her eyes. From the Duclair family. They claim you abandoned your post on your wedding day, caused moral damage to the hospital's reputation, and used your professional position to cultivate ties with wealthy patients. Zenziel felt indignation flare hot in her chest. After everything, they were still trying to punish her. It's nonsense, of course, Dr. Brooks added quickly. But protocol requires an official inquiry. The hearing was held 2 weeks. Later in a conference room, overlooking the Atlanta skyline, the chief medical officer, hospital legal counsel, and seated in the corner like a sulking child, Sterling Duclair were present. Sterling mumbled about family honor and embarrassment, but offered no evidence of negligence. Zenziel laid out the timeline calmly. The 5 a.m. emergency page, the critical condition of the pediatric patient, the 4-hour surgery, the surgical logs, security footage, witness statements from the OR team. She concluded quietly, the patient's father, Mr. Caspian Sterling, is available to testify if needed. At the mention of the name, Sterling Duclair seemed to shrink. He stared at the table and said nothing more. The board's decision was swift and unanimous. Dr. Vance's actions were entirely consistent with her professional duty and the Hippocratic oath. Complaint dismissed. As Zenziel left the room, her legs shook, not from fear, but from the sheer exhaustion of fighting a battle she hadn't started. Caspian was waiting outside by his car, hands in his pockets. All sorted, he asked. All sorted, she confirmed. Thrown out. Good. He opened the passenger door. Let's go get real food. You've been living on cafeteria trays too long. She laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in weeks. You're a very practical man, Caspian. Practical keeps the world turning, he replied with a small smile. 2 weeks after that, Kellen cornered her at the employee entrance, looking thinner, disheveled, jacket wrinkled. My mother's in the hospital, he said in a rush. Her heart. She's at the cardiac center, crying constantly. Jasmine went back to her parents. She couldn't handle the pressure. We canceled all paperwork with her. I'm choosing you now, Zenziel. I'm choosing you. She looked at the man she had once loved and felt. Nothing. No anger, no longing. Only a vast, quiet emptiness. You're not choosing me, she said calmly. You're choosing comfort because everything else fell apart. When your mother pushed, you chose her. When I needed you, you stayed home. Now that Jasmine's gone and your mother's sick, you come running back. That's not choice, Kellen. That's desperation. Give me a chance to be stronger. I can learn. She shook her head. Some moments can't be reclaimed. That morning was ours. You let it go. She walked past him, heels clicking on the concrete, and with every step felt lighter, as if shedding an old skin that had never quite fit. That same month, Mansa suffered a hypertensive crisis and was rushed to the hospital. Zenziel spent the night by her bedside, holding her hand, monitoring vitals herself. She told no one, not wanting to burden anyone. But in the morning, Caspian appeared quietly with a thermos of homemade chicken broth and fresh fruit. A nurse had mentioned it in passing. How did you know? Zenziel asked, rising from the chair. Doesn't matter, he said. How is she? He didn't offer advice or connections. He simply set the thermos down, squeezed Mansa's other hand gently, and said, Get well soon, ma'am. Zenziel misses you. When he left, Mansa smirked from her bed. He's a sensible man. Not a big talker. Later, after discharge, she told her daughter, A person is known by their actions, baby, not their words. This one acts. Spring brought new growth, literal and figurative. Dr. Brooks offered Zenziel a prestigious 3-month cardiovascular surgery fellowship in Washington, D.C., a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Go, baby, Mansa said without hesitation. I can take care of myself. And Caspian will check on me. Caspian's response was simpler. Do what you need to do. I'm not going anywhere. The 3 months in D.C. were intense. Long hours, complex cases, new techniques. But every Sunday evening, her phone rang at the same time. Caspian's steady voice on the line, asking how her week was, how Mansa was, how the cases were going. No pressure, no jealousy of her ambition. Just quiet, unwavering support. She came home stronger, sharper, more certain of who she was. A week after her return, Caspian arrived at the bungalow one evening. No gifts, no flowers, just him, in a clean shirt, standing in the kitchen, with the look of a man who had made up his mind. I don't want to drag this out, he said directly. I'm asking for your consent and for Mansa's blessing to marry you, to be by your side in whatever way you'll have me. Zenziel felt something inside her go still, like a pond finally settling after a storm. Mansa watched them both for a long moment, then nodded once. It's her choice, she said. But I'm not against it. I don't want a big wedding, Zenziel said quietly. No luxury, just family, a place where I won't be betrayed. Caspian met her eyes. I keep my word. And he did. The small restaurant sat just outside the city limits, tucked along a quiet stretch of road lined with towering pines and wild azaleas. It was nothing like the Grand Regency. No crystal chandeliers, no string quartet, no $50,000 floral arches, just warm wooden beams, soft lantern light, simple white tablecloths, and the faint scent of grilled steak and rosemary drifting from the kitchen. 30 people filled the private room, close colleagues from the hospital, a handful of old friends from medical school, Mansa's church sisters and Malik, the 5-year-old boy whose life Zenziel had saved, bouncing excitedly in a tiny suit beside his father. Zenziel wore a simple, elegant ivory dress, satin that skimmed her figure without fuss. No veil, no train. Her hair was pulled back in soft waves, a single gardenia tucked behind one ear. Mansa held her hand tightly as they walked the short aisle between the tables. There wasn't a single face in the room that had ever made her feel small. Caspian waited at the front, standing tall in a charcoal suit, no tie, his expression calm, but his eyes shining with something deeper than words. When Zenziel reached him, he took both her hands in his, large, warm, steady, and squeezed gently. The officiant, an old family friend of Mansa's, kept the ceremony short and heartfelt. Vows were simple, spoken clearly into the quiet room. I'm not a man of many words, Caspian said, voice low but carrying. But I promise you this. I will come home to you every single night. I will stand beside you in the hard moments, not behind anyone else. I will honor who you are, doctor, daughter, woman, and never ask you to be less so someone else can feel more. Zenziel felt her throat tighten, but her voice didn't waver. I promise to trust you with my whole heart, she said. To build a life where we both grow, where duty and love don't have to fight each other. To choose you every day the way you've already chosen me. They exchanged rings, plain platinum bands, unadorned. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the room erupted in warm applause and cheers. Malik ran up and hugged Zenziel's legs so hard she laughed out loud. Mansa wiped tears with the sleeve of her lavender dress and pulled Caspian into a fierce hug. I'm watching you, son, she whispered into his ear. But I think you'll do just fine. There was no elaborate reception line, no forced small talk with distant relatives. Just good food, laughter, and music from a 3-piece band playing old soul and Motown. Zenziel danced with her mother first, then with Malik, who stood on her feet as they swayed. When Caspian finally took her in his arms for their first dance, he held her close and rested his chin lightly on her head. Thank you, he murmured. For what? For letting me in, for trusting again, She pressed her cheek to his chest and listened to his heartbeat. Steady, strong, real. A year later, on the exact anniversary of the day she was meant to marry Kellen, Zenzil sat at the long farmhouse table in their new home, a solid, warm house on several wooded acres outside the city, with pine trees framing the view, and a wide wooden deck where they often ate. Dinner in the evenings. Mansa had moved in with them permanently. There was plenty of room, a sunny suite on the main floor with her own garden door, so she could tend her roses without stairs. She smiled more now, her blood pressure steady, her days filled with cooking, storytelling, and spoiling Malik whenever he visited. Malik called her Nana Mansa and followed her around like a shadow, begging for bedtime stories. About the strong doctor lady who saved me, Mansa obliged every time, embellishing just enough to make Zenzil roll her eyes. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, they gathered for dinner, grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and Mansa's famous cornbread. Malik was spending the night, already in his pajamas, chattering about kindergarten. Caspian raised his glass of sweet tea, none of them, drank much alcohol, and looked around the table. "A year ago today," he said quietly, "was probably not the best day for some of us." Zenzil met his eyes and smiled softly. "If it hadn't been for that day," she replied, "I wouldn't be sitting here with all of you." Mansa reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Closed doors, baby. Sometimes they slam for a reason." Later, after Malik was tucked in and Mansa had gone to her room with a new mystery novel, Zenzil and Caspian stood on the terrace watching. The city lights twinkle in the distance. The air smelled of pine and jasmine. Crickets sang in the trees. Caspian slipped his arms around her from behind, resting his hands on her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, voice low. "How one choice, one moment, can change everything," she said. "If I hadn't answered that 5 a.m. page, if I'd walked away from that surgery to make the wedding on time, if I'd gone back to Kellen out of fear of being alone," she shook her head, "I might be living a life that looked perfect from the outside. Quiet house, polite dinners, everyone approving. But it would have been hollow. I'd have spent years shrinking myself to fit." She turned in his arms to face him. "This," she said, gesturing to the house behind them, "the life they'd built, is real. You never asked me to justify who I am. You never made me choose between my calling and my heart." Caspian brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Because they're not separate. Your heart is why you're such a damn good surgeon. And your work is part of what makes you the woman I love." He said nothing more. He didn't need to. Some endings don't require applause or explanation. Some new beginnings don't need fanfare. A warm home, people waiting for you at the end of a long shift. Someone who stands beside you, not in front, not behind, but beside. The peace of knowing your worth isn't up for debate. That is enough. And for Zenzil Vance Sterling, it was everything. In the years that followed, she rose steadily in her field, publishing papers, mentoring residents, leading complex pediatric trauma cases. Caspian's company continued to grow, but he was home most nights, cooking dinner or helping with Malik's homework when the boys stayed over. Mansa's garden flourished, her roses winning ribbons at the county fair. Malik grew tall and strong, never forgetting the doctor who gave him a second chance at life. Occasionally, news filtered through Atlanta's circles about the Duclairs. Saria's health declined further. Kellen moved to Memphis, then Charlotte, changing jobs often. Jasmine married someone else. The family's influence quietly faded, their name no longer spoken with the same weight. Zenzil didn't follow the details. She didn't need to. One spring morning years later, she stood in the hospital corridor in her white coat, reviewing charts before rounds. A young female resident approached hesitantly, a brilliant doctor, but one whose family didn't understand her long hours, her dedication. "Dr. Vance Sterling," the resident said quietly, "how do you handle it when people don't get why this job matters more than everything else sometimes?" Zenzil looked at her for a long moment, thinking of a little boy on an operating table, of a wedding dress worn only once, of a mother's fierce love, of a man who kept his word. "You go where you're valued," she said finally, "not where you're merely tolerated. The people who truly love you will stand with you in the hard moments. The rest, let them go." The resident nodded, eyes clearing with new understanding. Zenzil continued down the hall, footsteps sure, heart full. She had saved more lives than she could count, but the greatest one she saved was her own. 5 years had passed since the quiet wedding in the pine-scented restaurant, and the house on the wooded acres had truly become a home. The pines had grown taller. Mansa's rose garden had spread into a riot of color along the back fence, and the wide deck now held a swing wide enough for 2, sometimes 3, when Malik clambered up between Zenzil and Caspian to watch the stars. Zenzil Vance Sterling was now 38, an attending pediatric trauma surgeon with a national reputation. She had published groundbreaking papers on splenic repair techniques in children, trained dozens of residents, and been invited to speak at conferences from Boston to Los Angeles. Yet she still took overnight call, still ran to the OR at 3 a.m. when a child needed her, still came home smelling of antiseptic and coffee. Caspian's company had expanded into sustainable urban development, winning awards for green high-rises that brought affordable housing into upscale neighborhoods. He still came home most nights, still cooked dinner with the same focused calm he brought to everything. Their life together was not flawless. There were arguments about schedules, exhaustion after long weeks, the ordinary friction of 2 strong-willed people, but it was solid, built on actions, not promises. Mansa, now in her late 70s, had slowed but not stopped. She tended her garden, taught Malik how to make perfect cornbread, and kept a sharp eye on everyone. Her blood pressure stayed controlled, thanks in no small part to Caspian quietly, ensuring she had the best cardiologist in the state and every medication delivered before she ran out. Malik was 10 now, tall and lanky, with his father's serious eyes and a laugh that rang through the house. He spent most weekends with them, calling Zenzil Doc, Z, and Mansa Nana. He still remembered. Nothing of the accident or the surgery, only the stories Nana Mansa told about the brave doctor who fought for him when he was very small. One crisp October morning, Zenzil's phone buzzed at 5:17 a.m., almost the exact minute. 5 years earlier, that everything had changed. She was already awake, reviewing charts in the study, a habit she'd never broken. The page was from the ER. 8-year-old girl, high-speed MVC, ruptured diaphragm and liver laceration, unstable. She kissed Caspian's shoulder as he stirred. "Gotta go." He nodded, already reaching for his phone to text the driver on standby. "Call me when you're out of the OR." By the time she reached the hospital, the team was ready. The girl, Amara, was small for her age, skin ashen, vitals slipping. Her mother waited in the family room, young and terrified, clutching a stuffed rabbit Amara had insisted on bringing. Zenzil paused at the door before scrubbing in. "I'm Dr. Vance Sterling. I'll be operating on your daughter." "We're going to do everything we can." The mother's eyes filled. "Just bring her back to me." The surgery lasted 6 hours, longer and more complex than Zenzil's case 5 years ago. The liver laceration was deep, the diaphragm tear extensive. Twice, Amara's heart faltered on the table. Twice, Zenzil's steady hands and calm voice brought her back. When the final suture was placed and vitals finally held strong, Zenzil felt the familiar wave of relief crash over her. She found Amara's mother in the waiting room and sat beside her. "She's stable," Zenzil said gently. "It was a tough fight, but she's strong." "She made it through?" The woman broke down in grateful sobs, clutching Zenzil's hands. Later, as Zenzil changed out of scrubs, Dr. Brooks, now semi-retired but still wandering the halls, stopped her. "You're the best we've ever had in Petty's trauma," he said gruffly. "That girl's alive because of you." Zenzil smiled tiredly. "Team effort." He shook his head. "Don't do that. Take the credit. You've earned it." That evening, she came home to the smell of Caspian's chicken stew simmering and Mansa's cornbread cooling on the counter. Malik was at the table doing homework, tongue sticking out in concentration. When he saw her, he jumped up. "Doc Z, Nana said you saved another kid today?" Zenzil ruffled his hair. "I had a lot of help." Mansa appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes shining with pride. "Sit down, baby. You look like you carried the world today." They ate together, the kitchen filled with easy conversation. Malik told them about his science project on the heart, how it pumps blood even when everything else stops. Zenzil listened, throat tight, remembering another small heart 5 years ago that had nearly stopped forever. After dinner, she and Caspian took their usual walk along the wooded path behind the house. Leaves crunched underfoot, the air cool and pine-scented. "I got a letter today," Caspian said quietly, handing her an envelope. Inside was heavy cream stationery, the return address a cardiac rehabilitation center in Florida. Saria Duclair. Zenzil's steps slowed. She wrote to me, Caspian continued. Not to ask for anything, just to say she's sorry. For that day. For everything. She's been ill for years, apparently. Kellen's married now, has a little girl. He's stable, I guess. But she said watching her granddaughter grow made her think about the kind of mother-in-law she'd been. She wanted me to tell you she's proud of the doctor you are, and that she understands now why her son wasn't strong enough for you. Zenzil folded the letter carefully. I don't need her apology, she said after a long moment. But I'm glad she found peace with it. Caspian nodded. Some people take the long way around to decency. They walked in silence for a while. Do you ever think about that morning? He asked. The one 5 years ago today? Every year, Zenzil admitted. Not with pain anymore, with gratitude. She stopped and turned to him. If that door hadn't slammed shut, I wouldn't have walked through this one. I wouldn't have you, or this life, or the version of myself I finally get to be, unapologetically. Caspian cupped her face gently. And I wouldn't have you, the woman who runs toward the hardest things and still comes home with light in her eyes. They kissed under the pines, slow and sure, the way people do when they know time is on their side. Later that winter, Zenzil received the highest honor of her career. The American College of Surgeons awarded her the Distinguished Service Award for lifetime contributions to pediatric trauma care. The ceremony was in Chicago. She almost turned it down. Too much fuss. But Mansa wouldn't hear it. You go up there and let them say your name right, her mother insisted. So she went, in a simple black gown, no jewelry except her wedding band and the gardenia. Caspian tucked into her hair before she left. When she took the stage to accept the award, the ballroom full of surgeons fell quiet. I'm not here because I'm extraordinary, she began, voice steady. I'm here because a long time ago, a little boy needed me at 5 a.m. on what was supposed to be my wedding day. And I chose him. I chose medicine. I chose the oath I took over every other promise. That choice cost me a life I thought I wanted. But it gave me the life I was meant for. One where I never have to shrink, or apologize, or choose between who I love and who I am. To every young doctor in this room, especially the women, you will be asked to make yourself smaller. To put your calling second. To be convenient. Don't. Go where you are valued, not where you are tolerated. The people who truly belong in your life will stand beside you in the operating room at 3 a.m. They will bring you soup when your mother is sick. They will keep their word when no one is watching. And to the little boy whose life started this chapter for me, Malik, you taught me that some mornings. The hardest choice is the only one that matters. She stepped down to thunderous applause. In the front row, Caspian stood with tears in his eyes. Beside him, Mansa dabbed her face with a handkerchief, muttering, That's my baby. Malik, now old enough to understand, grinned wide and waved the program like a flag. That night, back home in Atlanta, they gathered on the deck under blankets and stars. Malik had fallen asleep on the swing, head in Mansa's lap. Caspian poured champagne into mismatched mugs because no one felt like going inside for proper glasses. To closed doors, Mansa toasted quietly. To open ones, Zenzil added. And to the people brave enough to walk through them, Caspian finished. They clinked mugs gently, careful not to wake the boy. Years later, when young residents asked Dr. Vance Sterling how she built such an extraordinary career while raising a family, she always gave the same answer. I didn't do it alone, she'd say. I did it with people who never asked me to choose between saving lives and living mine. Find those people. Hold them close. The rest will follow. And in the quiet evenings, when the house was still and the pines whispered outside, Zenzil would stand on the deck with Caspian's arms around her, watching fireflies blink in the dark. She no longer wondered what her life might have been. She knew with every beat of her steady, surgeon's heart that this was the life she had saved, the greatest one of all.